Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Pryor, and I am the director of the Institute of Politics, and to all of you, we want to say welcome. This is the forum at the Institute of Politics and the Kennedy School. What a night it is, and what a great country we have. We are 35 days away, can you imagine that? 35 days away from the first election of this century. Tonight, millions of Americans across our country will be examining with intense scrutiny as the two standard bearers from the Republican and Democratic parties match their wits, skill, and nerves in trying to convince their fellow Americans of their qualifications to become President of the United States. Tonight, millions of those Americans will decide and will make their choice. Many others will wait. They will wait and hesitate, study further, wait until they're in the privacy, some of their own polling booth on November 7th before they make that choice. We at the Institute of Politics, we're proud to encourage the great tradition of young men and women being involved in government and politics. And as we speak, there are over 1,000 students from Harvard participating at debate site rallies. Hundreds welcomed Ralph Nader to the law school this afternoon, and many more here tonight gather in the forum as we share and savor this moment together. We want every student at Harvard, every student, to register. We want every student to vote. It is a precious treasure, and it carries, of course, a very rare obligation with it. Tonight, we have the high privilege to have with us Professor Alan Schroeder, who is the author of a new book documenting the history of American televised presidential debates. Alan Schroeder, I must say, is in high demand at this moment. He is a professor of journalism at Northeastern. He is an alum of the Kennedy School of Government. He is a noted scholar of American presidential debates, and he is our distinguished guest this evening. He's going to discuss some of the film clips, as we show you on the screen, of past debates and give us some insight into the meaning of this evening of this first presidential debate of the year 2000. A special thanks to our own Karen Kane, who helped to edit tonight's film to present to you. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Alan Schroeder. Alan, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Senator Pryor, and thanks to all of you for coming. This should be a fun evening, at least I hope so. The Senator mentioned that I'm a graduate of the Kennedy School, and in fact, it is here at the Kennedy School that I began my professional interest in debates. One of my professors, Gary Orrin, actually assigned me to write about the debates that year, and so I throw out a warning to all of you Kennedy School students. Be very careful what your professor assigned you to do, because you might have to come back and pontificate about it many years later. Before I came to the Kennedy School, I had a fairly lengthy career as a producer of television, and primarily of live television. And the confluence of my interest in politics and my experience as a television producer really is what lent itself to my interest in presidential debates and got me to thinking about these events and what is particularly unique and different about them. I believe that debates have to be defined first and foremost as television shows, and that we have to remember that debates are subject primarily to all of the other conventions that govern any kind of television programming. They're about celebrity, they're about conflict, they're about hype, and they're about visuals. And somewhere in all of that, the politics creeps in too. Debates have to be understood first of all, as live television, because live television is something very different from anything else in any form of media. It's very different also from everything else that happens during the campaign. Campaigns tend to be about wrapping the candidates in protective layers, insulating them from reality, and insulating them, in some sense, from the voters. Debates serve to counter that insulation and actually act to do the opposite thing. That's one reason we ought to examine them very closely and pay heed to them. Debates are also distinct as live television from news stories, which are mediated, which are interpreted by journalists. It's just the candidates speaking to the voters without anything standing in between. Debates are, I think, akin to other forms of live television in some ways more than they are to other forms of campaigning. I'm always reminded a little bit of the Super Bowl at this time of year. If you turn on the television set today, all you were seeing all day long was debate, debate, debate. Just as on Super Bowl Sunday and the weeks leading up to it, you get that same sort of drumbeat of attention leading into it. I also define debates according to what I call the television producer's timeline, which means that there's a chronology that surrounds televised presidential debates that influences them in ways that may not be apparent as we just look at the telecast itself. Producers operate according to a timeline of pre-production, production, and post-production. And so let me say a quick word about each of those things, and then we're going to get to some clips that I think will amplify this discussion and prep you for the event at hand here. When we think about pre-production, there is so much that takes place before the candidates walk out there and begin their debate. And you see some of this publicly discussed, but a lot of it takes place out of the eye of the public, out of the range of the media, and therefore off the radar screens. And only later, when historians have access to what went on, do we begin to understand those pre-production things that influence the outcome of the debates. For instance, the very issue of whether candidates will participate, which candidates will participate, who will be allowed to participate. Over the years, this has been a big issue. It's a big issue this year. The negotiations, you probably have heard a little bit about this. I was watching the news tonight, and one of the little details that came out was that evidently Al Gore tried to negotiate a temperature in the hall at UMass of 50 degrees, whereas the Bush people wanted it hotter. And this took me back to 1960. You remember that first debate where Richard Nixon started sweating? Well, he wanted, from that point forward, colder studios. The Kennedy people wanted him to sweat. They wanted hotter studios. All of these things bring to bear on the telecast itself. Pre-production negotiations. Then the strategizing. What are the objectives? What are the goals in each debate, and how should the candidate go about achieving those? And the preparation, the part of the process that is totally hidden from the media, except when you see these very sort of cheesily staged kind of photo op versions of the mock debates in which absolutely nothing of substance is said, but you get a little picture anyway. Then there is the production. This is the part of it that obviously is the most known to us. This is the visible part of the iceberg. And this is where it all happens in, sort of writ large. What's interesting during the debate is this tension between the predetermination, all the preparation that went into it before the event, and the inherent spontaneity of live television. And where those two things intersect is where we often get the most interesting moments in debates. I believe that format is an incredibly important thing, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, but as we get into looking at tonight's debate and what the format of that will be versus the formats in the two debates to come, I think you're going to see that some of the differences in the very texture of the debates depend on the structures that have been negotiated in advance and that are imposed upon the debates. And then there's the post-production period. For television producers, this usually means editing. But in this case, the producers don't have the hand in editing the debates. It's the journalists, it's the news media, who reinterpret the debates through the selection of sound bites that get played over and over and over again. So you have, in effect, two debates in any given situation. You have the live debate, and then you have what I call the parallel debate. The debate sort of reduced to its greatest hits. It's kind of a compression of the debates. And that those clips may actually influence and change the interpretations that people had initially as they watched the live debate. So think about it this way. Live television and television devised according to a timeline of pre-production, post-production, and the production itself. Now, what are we going to do this evening? What we've done actually is put together a series of clips that will provide a historical chronology, starting with the 1960 debates, and take us up to the moment. And in each case, I've chosen a clip that I think illustrates a principle about presidential debates that we have seen in action over the years. And I want to relate each of those principles to what may or may not, because it's live TV, we don't know, happen in tonight's debate. And we're going to start where all discussions of televised presidential debates start, with September 26, 1960, and the very first debate between Kennedy and Nixon. Before I play the clip, I just want you to watch for a couple things. One is, watch Richard Nixon's posture in this debate, and I will tell you a little story about that, and pay attention to the format of the debate. So we can see that first clip now.
Next question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Van Oker.
Mr. Vice President, since the question of executive leadership is a very important campaign issue, I'd like to follow Mr. Noven's question. Now, Republican campaign slogans, you'll see them on signs around the country as we did last week, say, "It's experience that counts." That's over a picture of yourself, sir. Implying that you've had more governmental executive decision-making experience than your opponent. Now, in his news conference on August 24th, President Eisenhower was asked to give one example of a major idea of yours that he adopted. His reply was, and I'm quoting, "If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember." Now, that was a month ago, sir, and the President hasn't brought it up since. And I'm wondering, sir, if you can clarify which version is correct, the one put out by Republican campaign leaders or the one put out by President Eisenhower?
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that if you know the President, that was probably a facetious remark. I would also suggest that insofar as his statement is concerned, that I think it would be improper for the President of the United States to disclose the instances in which members of his official family had made recommendations, as I have made them through the years, to him, which he has accepted or rejected. The President has always maintained, and very properly so, that he is entitled to get what advice he wants from his cabinet and from his other advisors without disclosing that to anybody, including, as a matter of fact, to Congress.
Phrase "tight smile," the little glimpses of Nixon with his teeth sort of gritted there as he tries to respond in a what I guess for Richard Nixon would pass as a humorous reaction are quite interesting there. The point here is the pre-debate negotiations, the pre-production decisions that were made influence what you see on the screen there. Why is Nixon shifting his weight so much? He had banged his knee about a month earlier getting out of a car door at a campaign stop in North Carolina, had developed an inflammation and had been hospitalized. The Kennedy people knew this. When it came time to negotiate formats, they came up with the idea of, let's have the candidates stand. And oddly enough, Nixon's people did not jump on that and fight back. And so what you see is the result there. Nixon looks terribly uncomfortable. To add to that, by the way, when he got to the studio in Chicago, getting out of the car door at WBBM, he banged his other knee. And so he was in bad shape. By all rights, he probably should have done that debate from a wheelchair. But this shows you the importance of these pre-production decisions. The other thing there is the format that I asked you to notice. You've got a group of reporters asking questions. This is the format that was employed in all presidential debates up until 1992 at the insistence of the campaigns. But there's a double-edged sword there, because you heard how nasty that question was from Senator Van Oker. Tempered by the number of times Van Oker says "sir" in asking the question. I sort of like that. In any case, this notion that those decisions that you make ahead of the debate can influence what actually happens in it is a lesson that was not lost in any subsequent negotiation. And you never had any side in any debate, pre-debate negotiation, give in as easily as Nixon's did that year. Bringing us forward, what does that mean for tonight's debate? Well, there's no press panel, and that is a format that seems to have gone out of favor. And one of the reasons it's gone out of favor is the candidates finally realized that the journalists were often going to ask these gotcha kind of questions, just as Senator Van Oker did all the way back in 1960. Another kind of sidelight on this first debate is it seems so serious, the whole tone of it. If you watch the whole thing, it's very heavy on content. Nobody is joking around. There are no David Letterman top 10 lists or anything like that in that 1960 campaign. We flash forward then 16 years to 1976 because, of course, there were no debates in 64, 68, and 72. None in 64, although Kennedy, before his assassination, had committed to debate. But Lyndon Johnson, the sort of accidental nominee that year, wanted no part of it. And Richard Nixon, of course, was the nominee in 68 and 72 and had learned his lesson. So 1976, Ford and Carter. What I'd like you to think about in this one is this notion of the power of live television to divert debates in unforeseen directions. So we can look at that.
And has continued up until now. There's a breakdown in the trust among our people and the...
At the moment, all we can do is watch this interesting development with the President of the United States, who also happens to be a candidate for the presidency of the United States, and a former governor of Georgia, who is the other major candidate for the presidency, doing about what we're doing, which is waiting for something to happen.
For 27 minutes without moving. Neither one of them wanted to be the first one to sit down lest he look like a wimp. They didn't move, they didn't talk. If you watched it on your screen, you would have thought that someone had frozen the video or still framed it. But they didn't want to be the one to, you know, sit down. But it does show you that in live television, no matter how important and powerful you are or how much you prepare, television has its own momentum, and sometimes that momentum will dictate the way that the debate goes. As we apply that to tonight's debate, one thing that you can be sure of is that they will be on triple microphones because they were only on one mic there. And everything in the debate hall has been triply outfitted so that if one system goes down, you've got a couple of backup opportunities. But it also shows you the lack of agility on both the part of Ford and Carter, that they did not roll with the punches or feel comfortable enough to either crack a joke or sit down or go shake hands with each other or something of a more human nature than just standing there. Both of them later, by the way, to their credit, admitted to being embarrassed by that because they looked at it and they had pretty much the same reaction you all did. One unforeseen consequence of all of this, by the way, this 27-minute audio gap, is that the networks had all this time to fill. They didn't know what to do, so they started going to the campaign managers in the hall and getting their take on how the debate was going up to that point. And I would posit that that is the birth of debate spin right there. It kind of came about as an accidental thing, but nonetheless, once the campaigns realized, hey, wait a minute, they'll put us on, they'll let us talk up our candidate. It may not take an audio gap to get that, but it's not a bad idea. We see now the lengths to which that goes and how that has spun, if you'll pardon a bad pun, out of control. So also from 1976, let's look at one of the all-time best-known debate clips.
Mr. Frankel, a question for President Ford.
Mr. President, I'd like to explore a little more deeply our relationship with the Russians. They used to brag back in Khrushchev's day that because of their greater patience and because of our greed for business deals, that they would sooner or later get the better of us. Is it possible that despite some setbacks in the Middle East, they've proved their point? Our allies in France and Italy are now flirting with communism. We've recognized a permanent communist regime in East Germany. We've virtually signed in Helsinki an agreement that the Russians have dominance in Eastern Europe. We've bailed out Soviet agriculture with our huge grain sales. We've given them large loans, access to our best technology, and if the Senate hadn't interfered with the Jackson Amendment, maybe you would have given them even larger loans. Is that what you call a two-way street of traffic in Europe?
I believe that we have negotiated with the Soviet Union since I've been president from a position of strength. There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence and occupying most of the countries there and making sure with their troops that it's a communist zone, whereas on our side of the line, the Italians and the French are still flirting with possibility?
I don't believe, Mr. Frankel, that the Yugoslavians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Romanians consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. I don't believe that the Poles consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. Each of those countries is independent, autonomous. It has its own territorial integrity. And the United States does not concede that those countries are under the domination of the Soviet Union.
Great line after that. He said, after that debate, I wanted to go into the first Polish bar I could find because I figured drinks would be on the house. And, you know, the lesson here is don't make a mistake because the media will jump all over it, which points up that really what debaters are playing to are two different constituencies, the media and the audience at home. As we relate that to tonight, there's a lot of talk about Bush tonight needs not to make a mistake because of the example of Gerald Ford. Let's jump up to 1980 and Carter and Reagan and look at the idea of style versus substance.
Yes, President Carter, wage earners in this country, especially the young, are supporting a Social Security system that continues to affect their income drastically. The system is fostering a struggle between young and old and is drifting the country toward a polarization of these two groups. How much longer can a young wage earner expect to bear the ever-increasing burden of the Social Security system?
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare. Now we have an opportunity to move toward national health insurance with an emphasis on the prevention of disease, an emphasis on outpatient care, not inpatient care, an emphasis on hospital cost containment to hold down the cost of hospital care for those who are ill, an emphasis on catastrophic health insurance so that if a family is threatened with being wiped out economically because of a very high medical bill, then the insurance would help pay for it. These are the kind of elements of a national health insurance important to the American people. Governor Reagan, again, typically is against such a proposal.
Governor, there you go again. When I opposed Medicare, there was another piece of legislation meeting the same problem before the Congress. I happened to favor the other piece of legislation and thought that it would be better for the senior citizens and provide better care than the one that was finally passed.
Employs the chuckle as a political weapon like nobody's business. I mean, it's just amazing. Debates, of course, as television shows are as much about style as they are about substance, if not more so. And what stands out in this debate is Reagan's humor and self-possession in contrast to Carter's sort of pinched being very well informed. And I think that there are some lessons we might apply to tonight's debate from this 1980 debate as well. I don't think that style or substance alone, either one, can win a debate. It's a combination of the two, and if you have to err on one side over the other, probably style, rather, is where you want to go with that. You know, the other thing there is Reagan was so good about communicating his ideas sort of thematically, in common sense language, almost as though he was just talking to you across the fence, the backyard fence. And that's a lesson that one would think all debaters would learn from, but it's remarkable how many people don't quite get the importance of that. All right, 84. Let's see Reagan in a kind of a different context here. The point of this clip is that debaters have to understand the objective of a particular debate.
We now start our final round of questions. We do want to have time for your rebuttal. We start with Diane. Diane Sawyer.
Since we are reaching the end of the question period, and since in every presidential campaign the candidates tend to complain that the opposition candidate is not held accountable for what he or she says, Let me give you the chance to do that. Mr. Mondale, beginning with you. What do you think the most outrageous thing is your opponent said in this debate tonight?
You want to give me some suggestions? Well, I'm going to use my time a little differently. I'm going to give the president some credit. I think the president has done some things to raise the sense of spirit, morale, good feeling in this country, and he's entitled to credit for that. What I think we need, however, is not just that, but to move forward, not just congratulating ourselves, but challenging ourselves to get on with the business of dealing with America's problems. I think in education, when he lectured the country about the importance of discipline, I didn't like it at first, but I think it helped a little bit. But now we need both that kind of discipline and the resources and the consistent leadership that allows this country to catch up in education and science and training. I like President Reagan. And this is not personal. There are deep differences about our future, and that's the basis of my campaign.
That first debate in 1984, Walter Mondale's performance in that is one of the great strategic debates of all time, because he went in there with a plan, and he called it the gold watch approach. It's, in other words, President Reagan, you've done a hell of a job, you're a great guy, here's your gold watch, now go home and retire. And it didn't quite play out that way, but you can see the vestiges of that even in a question that had nothing to do with that particular idea. Mondale was able to turn the question, go back to his strategy. Mondale had not planned to turn to Reagan and say, I like the president, but he saw throughout the debate that any time he was complimentary toward Reagan, it kind of rattled Reagan a little bit. And you see in the cutaway shot of Reagan there that he's quite taken aback by that. And it does show you, though, an important idea here, that in each debate, and for every debater, there is an objective that you must go into the debate with. And your ability to sort of pre-see what that objective is and then carry it off is what often wins debates. I would make the point, bringing this again to tonight's debate, that Al Gore has a really good track record in that regard. He sort of is able to kind of size up in advance his opponent, the situation, and tailor his debate performance to whatever those particular requirements are. There's another little sidelight in all of this, and that is that incumbent presidents have a very difficult job to do in a debate, because they can only stand to lose. And incumbent presidents as debaters are 4 years out of practice. For 4 years, nobody has criticized, nobody has said, no, you can't, you shouldn't, you mustn't. So they're not quite ready to hear someone take them on in so direct a way. And I think it's a real tribute to our system that incumbent presidents agree to debate, because of course, Reagan in '84 particularly did not have to. He was going to win that election no matter what happened. Let's then go to another debate from 1984. This is one of my personal favorites. One of the things when you study debates, you have to watch them over and over and over again. Some of them get quite tedious, but this is one that I never tire of. This is the Bush-Ferraro vice presidential debate of '84. And the point here is, how do you treat your opponent in a debate? Let's see this.
Some Democrats cringe at the words spying and covert activity. Do you believe both of them have a legitimate role in countering terrorist activity around the world?
I think they have a legitimate role in gathering information. And what had happened was the CIA in the last bombing had given information to our administration with reference to the actual threats that embassy was going to be bombed. So it wasn't the CIA was at fault. There's legitimate reason for the CIA to be existence, and that's to gather intelligence information for our security. But when I see the CIA doing things like they're doing down in Central America, supporting a covert war, no, I don't support that kind of activity. The CIA is there meant to protect our government, not there to subvert other governments.
I think I just heard Mrs. Ferraro say that she would do away with all covert action. And if so, that has very serious ramifications, as the intelligence community knows. This is serious business. And sometimes it's quiet support for a friend. And so I'll leave that one there. But let me help you with the difference, Ms. Ferraro, between Iran and the embassy in Lebanon. Iran, we were held by a foreign government. In Lebanon, you had a wanton terrorist action where the government opposed it. We went to Lebanon to give peace a chance, to stop the bombing of civilians in Beirut, to remove 13,000 terrorists from Lebanon. We did. We saw the formation of a government of reconciliation, and for somebody to suggest, as our two opponents have, that these men died in shame, they better not tell the parents of those young Marines. They gave peace a chance, and our allies were with us, the British, the French, and the Italians.
Congresswoman Ferraro.
Let me just say, first of all, that I almost resent, Vice President Bush, your patronizing attitude that you have to teach me about foreign policy.
Only male-female general election debate, sad to say, but it points up one of the issues that all debaters must face, and that is, how do you treat your opponent? And George Bush was really bedeviled by the fact that he was debating a woman and that there was no precedent for this. But even if, under any circumstances, it isn't just the performance that a particular debater gives in isolation. It is the dynamic that exists between the two of them and how that plays out. One of the debate coaches I interviewed in writing my book was a Democratic advisor named Tom Donald in Washington, D.C., a very bright guy, who used the phrase appropriate aggressor. The debaters have to be the appropriate aggressor in order to pull off a victory. Because you can't be passive, but you can't cross a certain line. I'm reminded when I see this Bush-Ferraro clip of the Clinton-Lazio debate of a couple of weeks ago, where something sort of similar happened in a way. It shows you the dangers involved in overstepping your boundaries, and not just in a male-female context, but in being overly aggressive or being perceived by the audience as being overly aggressive. A little sidelight on this one, too. One of the things that needled Geraldine Ferraro particularly in this debate is in the negotiations ahead of time, it was agreed that she would call Mr. Bush Vice President Bush and he would call her Congresswoman Ferraro. In the debate, he referred to her as Mrs. Ferraro, and consistently and not just sort of accidentally. And so she was already not happy once that debate got underway. But I like that clip because she gained some points in that moment, I think, and somewhat diminished him and showed you the dangers of overplaying your hand in being aggressive as a debater. Well, next we come to a clip from 1988, another vice presidential clip that really needs no introduction. I don't even need to say anymore, just roll it.
It is not just age, it's accomplishments, it's experience. I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of Vice President of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy. What has to be done in a situation like that? In a situation like
You're only taking time
is to call in the joint.
your own candidate.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
You're the one that was making the comparison, Senator. And I'm one who knew him well. And frankly, I think you're so far apart in the objectives you choose for your country that I did not think the comparison was well taken.
Tom, a question for Senator Benson.
Since you seem to be taking no hostages on the stage, let me ask you a question.
That clip actually, I think, illustrates better than anything else the value of preparation. You watch Lloyd Benson, And the way he delivers that line, it's almost like, I hate to have to say this, but, you know, in fact, Quayle had been comparing himself to Jack Kennedy on the campaign trail. There were obviously opposition research people from the Benson campaign in the audiences for these things. They knew it was coming. Quayle had been warned not to do it in the debate, and Benson was just laying there like, you know, the hunter in the bushes waiting for his quarry, and indeed, he got his shot off. I think this is another example of how debates function particularly well as television, because as you watch the shooting of that, it's very well directed. I'm always amazed because, you know, we look at it in retrospect, we know what's coming, so the shots sort of, you know, cue us as to something we already know. But this was live, you know, the director had no idea when he took that two-shot what was coming. But it plays out so beautifully, the doubles where you see both of them in relationship to each other, the reactions, the singles, the very tightness of the shots really underscore what's going on. That wide shot of the audience laughing. After this debate, by the way, they changed the rules. And today, when the audience comes into the debate hall, supporters of one candidate are interspersed with supporters of the other candidates rather than being segregated by party. And that is something that is written into the negotiated documents as a result of what happened in this debate. So let's go to another famous moment, 1988, the second Bush-Dukakis debate, and you can probably predict what's coming here too.
Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest murder rate of any industrial state in America. But we have work to do in this nation. We have work to do to fight a real war, not a phony war against drugs, and that's something that I want to lead, something we haven't had over the course of the past many years, even though the Vice President has been, at least allegedly, in charge of that war.
Going to moderate the Thursday night vice presidential debate. I have this fantasy that his first question is going to be, if Hadassah Lieberman were... No, that won't happen. This is a good example of what happens when you don't prepare or you ignore your preparations, because Michael Dukakis actually had this answer ready that he had rehearsed, that he was given, talking about his own experience. His father and brother both were victims of crimes. They knew some form of this question would come up, and he was supposed to respond with his personal experience. Stories work very well in debates. It's that idea of communicating your message in a way that people can relate to. He didn't do that. He gave instead this very dry institutional response, referred to Bernard Shaw as Bernard. In the next question, Bernard Shaw asks George Bush, if you were to die before Election Day and you had been elected and Dan Quayle becomes the president, and Bush stops him right there and says, Bernie! And it's the difference, a very subtle difference, and yet to the audience, you're seeing night and day there, just in the way that the two men responded to sort of similarly gruesome questions. I also make the point about that question that one of the prohibitions written into the negotiation was no reaction shots of the audience. Kitty herself was just a few feet away. She later wrote in her autobiography that she was appalled at that question, and had they been able, logically and in directing, you would do this, to have taken that shot of her, and you see that she's appalled, it might have helped her husband's response not seem quite as clinical as it was, but you know, their own rules sort of hung them on that, I think. And then let's look at one final clip here before we throw it open for Q&A, and that is from the really groundbreaking town hall debate in Richmond, Virginia in 1992 with Bush, Perot, and Clinton, moderated by Carol Simpson. We can see that now.
We have a question right here.
Yes, how has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
May I answer?
Well, Mr.
Who do you want to start with?
Of course.
Who-
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
For each of you,
Yes.
so
It caused me to disrupt my private life and my business.
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you
on
personally.
a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Well, I'm sure it has. I love my grandchildren. I want to think
How?
that. I want to think that they're going to be able to afford an education. I think that that's an important part of being a parent. Maybe I won't get it wrong. Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
Well, what I'm saying,
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question, and I'll try to answer it.
I've had friends that have been laid off from jobs.
Yeah.
I know people who cannot afford to pay the mortgage on their homes, their car payment. I have personal problems with the national debt. But how has it affected you? And if you have no experience in it, how can you help us if you don't know what we're feeling?
I think she means more the recession.
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who lost their jobs, lost their homes? Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. Every year, Congress and the president sign laws that make us do more things. It gives us less money to do it with. I see people in my state, middle-class people, their taxes have gone up in Washington and their services have gone down, while the wealthy have gotten tax cuts. I have seen what's happened in this last 4 years when, in my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names. When a factory closes, I know the people who ran it. When the businesses go bankrupt, I know them. And I've been out here for 13 months, meeting in meetings just like this ever since October, with people like you all over America, people that have lost their jobs, lost their livelihood, lost their health insurance. What I want you to understand is the national debt is not the only cause of that. It is because America has not invested in its people.
We are going to miss that guy. Backstage during that little exchange, James Carville, Clinton's advisor, at the moment that George Bush said, help me out, I don't think I get it, said, we just won the election. And I think he was probably right about that. People often ask, who are the best debaters? And I think that there were three. I think that John F. Kennedy, I think Ronald Reagan, and I think the gold standard for all presidential debaters is Bill Clinton. Not just because of his natural gifts, of which he had plenty, but he also worked like a horse on this stuff. He actually knew exactly how far he could go out to the apron of that stage, be in the shot with the people. He sat down with the director ahead of time while the other candidates just sort of went through the motions of their pre-debate check. He peppered that director with questions. If I stand here, what's the shot going to look like? Can I go over here? Will you get a relationship shot with the people? And actually put into the debate all the effort that paid off in that clip that you just saw. So that brings us, 96 was a boring debate year. I don't have a clip for you from that. But that brings us full circle, and you want to join me up here, Senator Pryor?
We're going to have a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen, for some Q&A, and we'll establish the rules for that in just a second. First, just so you will know a little bit about the rest of the evening, at about 8:10 we're going to break, and you will be served pizza, should you like it. And should you desire, you guys want any pizza? Okay, we've got it coming. It's in the oven, I promise you. Okay. What'd y'all think about this? This was pretty amazing, wasn't it? Did you like it? Great. I tell you, this has just been so fascinating for political junkies. It's just the best. Alan, we have 4 microphones, Alan, and we have 2 up here and 2 here. It's hard to see the ones up here. I'm going to yield to you because you're a professor and you're used to calling on people. We're going to break about 10 minutes after 8. Have our pizza, come back here about 6 or 7 minutes till 9. We're going to talk about the rules and the format for watching the real debate that's coming up, the most critical part of this campaign of 2000. So let's open up right now. Don't elongate your questions, please. Make them brief and
say your name first, if you would.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's start over here.
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a sophomore here. Thanks for coming, Professor. It was pretty fascinating. Just a quick follow-up on the last clip. That was also the famous clip where George Bush looked at his watch while he was being asked the question. I'm just curious, how much do you think that impacted that debate?
Well, he actually looks at his watch twice in that debate, and it definitely gave off the impression at the time, and a lot of people commented, obviously, that he looked like he would rather be somewhere else. How many of you saw the special on PBS that Jim Lehrer did where he interviewed all the candidates, and he asked Bush about that, and Bush said, yeah, I looked at my watch because I did want to get out of there. And so he was he didn't, try to sugarcoat that at all. But I believe that we should pay attention to these kind of unseen little visual moments because they often convey truths. You don't want to over-conclude from them. You don't want to read too much into that or say, he looked at his watch, I better not vote for him. But there is a message that is maybe part of a larger kind of image that's being projected that I think stands to some kind of reason for us to tap into. The reality, as you know, in presidential campaigns is that there is so much artifice and there is so much attention giving to preventing those kinds of moments that when they do bust through the veneer, that we need to really sit up and pay some attention to that because that's one of the few chances we have to get at something that the campaigns are not spoon-feeding us. And I think the George Bush looking at his watch moments are classic examples of that.
Thank you.
Over here.
Do you think that the refusal of the Presidential Debate Commission to include more than 2 candidates is a result of anything that happened in 1992?
Well, it's an interesting thing about that. They've set this standard of 15% standing in the polls, as most of you probably know, and personally that strikes me as a bit high. I would think that 10% might be a more logical number. But the bottom line is that no matter what standards the commission sets forth, the candidates themselves have an awful lot to say about this. So my guess is that 15% standing set forth by the Commission on Presidential Debates is one piece of that, but that the desires of the Bush and Gore campaigns to exclude Ralph Nader and Patrick Buchanan from the debates also weighed pretty heavily into their exclusion. Perot was invited in '92, not just because of where he stood in the debates, but because both Gore and Bush wanted to get his supporters.
And Bush?
Yeah, President Bush wanted to get his supporters, and they did not want to alienate the Perot supporters by excluding the candidate from it. So I think that we can look at that standard that is set and say that there are problems with it. This is one of the trickiest issues in presidential debates. It is one that has dogged the debates for years, and I don't know quite what the answer is. Other than someone coming on so strong and with such a degree of popularity that the people absolutely demand and will not settle for anything less than the full inclusion of everybody. And frankly, as whatever contributions they have to make, I personally don't think that either Nader or Buchanan bring that to the table this year. So let's see, where, somewhere up there.
Oh, well, actually, my name is Carrie, and that was something you've actually answered my question, so I was just sitting here trying to think of another question. So what would you say would be maybe 3 of the most important features in a presidential debate? Like if I were going to be in a presidential debate, what would be the 3 things that you would say to me, just don't forget to do this?
This seems like such sort of basic. It's the same advice I would give you if you were going to go speak to, a high school class or something. Think about who your audience is and be relaxed about it. Try to have a little fun with it if you possibly can. I mean, that's easy to say. It's 90 million people, not so easy to actually do. But that shows. And this idea of thinking through not only your own performance, but your own performance in relationship to the other person that you're on the stage with. That's very important because what we're watching is not just how Al Gore does that by himself, but how he treats his opponent. Because how he treats his opponent is indicative of something about him that goes beyond just, getting across his own message. Those are the intangible kinds of things that you never get to see, because of course we don't see the candidates with each other. And when they're dealing with voters, they're dealing in a very deferential way, just by definition. So to see how someone treats an opponent, I think, is useful information. Is there a second one up here? Okay.
You pointed out a lot of interesting tricks and styles the people at the debates use, like the Nixon's makeup and such, and that Benson was able to think of a clever joke. But how much does this really translate into their ability to govern that voters should make their decisions based on?
Obviously, debates are not perfectly analogous to governing or to acting as president, but I think that there are two ways in which it's useful to watch debaters and think about how does that apply to the job they would do as president. One of these is just the simple act of communicating on television. The President of the United States does much of his work on television. The power of persuasion, the power to move public opinion, to get the country behind you, especially if there's a difficult problem to wrestle with. You have to be able to do that on TV. And so the debate offers a little preview of the style in which a candidate or president will do that. Look at Reagan, for instance. What you saw in that debate is pretty much how he was as president and how he communicated with the country. The same with Bill Clinton. So it does offer us little insights into how they're going to put their message across. And the second thing is, we want to be able to see how candidates function under a high degree of pressure. Because what is more pressure than the job of being president of the United States? Going in front of the largest audiences of their lives under the scrutiny of 90 million people is as high pressure a situation as you could possibly imagine. And I think that offers a little preview into how they're going to handle the actual job of doing the president. There are obviously a lot of things that are different too, but those are two ways in which I think it is a bit of a precursor.
Hi. You may have answered this in your last answer, but my question is, in the beginning you made a good point about us looking at the nexus between the spontaneity and the pre-production of the debates. But it seems to me that now the debates are so rehearsed, everyone knows what the questions are going to be, more or less, everyone knows what the answers are going to be, and they each know what the other's going to answer, so they've got their rebuttal already rehearsed. I'm just wondering what the point is right now. We all kind of know what's happening, and will the debates now really be moot?
Well, it appears that I'm not a great believer in polls, but there is such a fluctuation in the polls, and there is such a shift back and forth as to who's in the lead. And what appears to be happening is that people have not totally made up their minds and are actually waiting for the debates. There's a theory that debates freeze campaigns because people wait until after the debates are over to make up their minds based on what has happened in the debates. And so in a tight race like this, when it is so neck and neck, the debates, however ritualistic they are, may help settle some minds. And there's another thing that goes on too, and that is that not everyone who watches a debate is as well informed to know that what they're saying is all pre-digested and scripted. And actually surveys show that many people find debates quite educational and are getting their first exposure to the candidates' issues on a lot of things. I think you have to make a distinction between how the media evaluate debates and how average viewers evaluate debates. And that, by the way, I think is one of the tricky things about performing in a debate, is that you're actually playing to both constituencies, and you have to keep those two sort of disparate ideas in your head simultaneously. But I do think they're valuable exercises, even to see how someone handles the ritual. When you go to the opera, you know what the aria is, but they can do it better, they can do it worse, they can fall flat on their faces, or what have you. Thanks. Up? No? Okay.
It seems as if you look at the history of presidential debates, there's really only been one occasion in which the debates have really changed the momentum for one candidate, and I think those are the Kennedy-Nixon debates. And if you look at a lot of the reporters, what they've been saying now is that this debate, the Gore and Bush race basically, is as tight as the Kennedy-Nixon was back then. And I guess the question really is, can we see enough of a momentum switch because of the debates, or is it going to be just sort of natural voter turnout, especially with the claims that 100 million people are going to tune into the debates tonight?
Well, I think it's hard to know, and I also think that there's something a little bit different about this year's debates that may play into that, and that is the schedule. This year we have the 3 presidential and the 1 vice presidential debate compressed into a 2-week period. And the vice presidential debate is just 2 nights from now. So I have this feeling that what may happen is that one debate will flow into the next, and that maybe we will evaluate these things as an aggregate rather than the individual debates assuming too much importance on their own. But how does it all play out, and how will we know? This is one of the great conundrums about trying to analyze what difference debates make in the final outcome. It is very hard, if not impossible, to separate debates out from all the other influences in a campaign that may bring to bear on someone's voting decision. And there has been some research done on this, but you can't sort of isolate debates and say that and that alone made the difference. So I'm not sure that we'll ever know precisely.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Shankar. I'm a junior at the college. Much has been made in recent days about how the game of expectations is going to be played out in tonight's debate. The Bush team is trying to make Al Gore seem like the fiercest debater in the history, and the Gore team is trying to make Bush seem like he's not really adult. Historically, how has the game of expectations been played out? And as far as tonight's debate is concerned, what do you think are the standards? Winning and losing is all very nebulous in a presidential debate, but what do you think are the standards based on the expectations that each debater will have to sort of meet to win, quote unquote?
Right. Well, to answer the first part of your question, in 1960 there were no expectations. The press missed this story in advance. The Washington Post had one little paragraph on the day of the first Kennedy-Nixon debate that was basically a programming advisory what time it was going to be on. They did no analysis. The New York Times had something like a 2 or 3 paragraph story. That was it. So there were no pre-debate expectations until after the first debate. The press quickly corrected that, and going into the second one, there was all kinds of talk based on that first one. It is a big factor, and it gets sort of worse each year. I knew it had reached kind of a critical mass in '96 when Bill Clinton, probably the best presidential debater that we have ever seen and may ever see, was going out and telling reporters, boy, I am sure out of shape on this. And Hillary went on one of the Regis and Kathy Lee and said, well, Bob Dole's been in the Senate, and that's a debating society, and they're so good at it, and he's just going to, do a wonderful job against my husband. So, it's almost knee-jerk at this point. People can't help themselves from doing this. As to the expectations for each of these 2 candidates tonight, I think it's very true that the expectations are higher for Gore, and logically so, but what that may mean is that that wasn't supposed to be funny. Based on, and I say that that is not just a catty remark. I mean, I'm trying to base that on some sort of data here, let's say. But as such, Bush obviously has an easier time of surpassing the expectation that has been set for him.
Let's do one more question.
Okay, yeah, please, before I get in trouble. Okay.
Wherever.
Okay. Yeah.
Where were you last time?
Let's see. I was over there.
Here's one up.
Up? Okay. I haven't done one up for a while.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Megan Seibel, and I'm a sophomore at the college. And after researching several decades of presidential and vice presidential debates, do any recommendations come to mind that you would make to the PDC or to campaigns involved in negotiating formatting as to what changes in formatting you would suggest?
That's a really good question. I think a variety of formats is best. That's what we have this year. You're going to have 3 different formats. Different debaters are going to excel in different formats. So it helps level the playing field if you have a variety of formats. I would like to see experimentation in the formats. We're beginning to see that, but the candidates resist. I thought it was very interesting the other night in the Clinton-Lazio debate, the introduction of video clips as a means of sparking a discussion. If you show someone on tape saying something, they cannot back away from it as easily. It is there as a guidepost, as a measuring post. Another thing I think would be very interesting, two other ideas for format. One would be a group debate in which the candidate gets to have a couple of advisors up there with him or her, because that's the way that people govern. It isn't just one person in isolation making a decision. So the question is asked, and you sort of talk about it and present your answer as you would in a real situation. And the other one that I would like to see is a case study, not unlike some of the things you do here at the Kennedy School or the business school or the law school, where you actually devise a scenario and game it and make the candidates respond to a series of sort of hypothetical situations and make it more and more complex. So you get to see how their minds work rather than just how well they're able to memorize and spit back answers. I'd love to see anything that challenged the debaters to exercise their brains in a more complex way.
Let's give Professor a big, big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've all learned from the master. Now, I'm going to ask John Della Volpe to come up just one moment and announce as to what's going to happen at about 5 minutes until 9. John, would you come? Tell them about yourself and what you're going to do.
Great, thanks, Senator. My name is John Della Volpe, and what we're going to do now is we're going to, I want to mention 3 points. I'm going to give you an introduction as to what we'll be doing when we actually watch the debate in about 45, 50 minutes. First I'm going to mention is after I make my remarks, there's pizza behind the stage here. The second thing we'll be doing is we'll be doing something called a dial poll. It's something that each of the candidates have been doing to prepare for these debates over the past couple weeks. We will be coming back here around 8:30 to recruit 60 people from the audience. We'll be recruiting 3 sets of people. 20, we'll be asking for volunteers, 20 totally uncommitted voters, okay? 20 people who identify themselves as probably or leaning towards voting for Al Gore, then 20 people who identify themselves as probably or definitely going to vote for George W. Bush. At that point, we will reassemble here. Each of you, each of the 60 that we choose, will use one of these real-time wireless meters, and you'll be asked to enter your feedback every single second to the debate as it happens. And what we'll be doing is, through our monitor in our system here, and through these 2 TV monitors in the back of the room, which the participants won't be able to see, is we'll be able to track your scores every single second. We'll find out which points resonate, which points don't resonate, for each of the 3 groups of voters that we recruit here. Okay, so it should be fun. I'll give you much more of an introduction at about 8:30, 8:45. The last thing is anybody who's in these reserve seating chairs, we have to reset that. So if you wouldn't mind moving, and then we'll reset them back. Thanks, guys.
Great, good.